Today in the Chicana kitchen, we're making depression cake. This recipe, and others like it, were developed during World Wars I and II and the Great Depression, times when household budgets were stretched thin and many ingredients were put out of reach by wartime rationing. This particular recipe makes a delicious, fudgy chocolate cake without the use of milk, butter, or eggs. Sound good? It's great. Not only is it budget friendly, but it's also friendly to vegans and folks who are lactose intolerant. Plus, it is super quick and easy to make. So, let's get baking. This recipe comes together quickly, so before you get started mixing, preheat your oven to 350 degrees and have either a 9-inch round or 8-inch square pan greased and or lined and ready to go. And once you've done that, it's time to start mixing. Everything's going to go into this one bowl, so we will start with the flour. This is all-purpose flour, and we are using 1.5 cups, which weighs in at 187 grams, like so. Good enough. To that, we will add cocoa powder. And for this recipe, you can actually use either Dutch or natural cocoa powder. We're going for 1/3 of a cup, which is 28 grams, just a couple extra grams, it won't hurt. And then we have our baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking soda plus 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we are going to give this a good stir. Always, whenever you have leavener involved, so that's your baking soda or baking powder or what have you, you want to give it at least 30 seconds to evenly mix in. So we'll stir for a few more seconds. There we go. And then we'll add one more dry ingredient, and that would be granulated sugar. We're going to add a cup of that, which clocks in at 200 grams by weight. There we go. And give it another little stir. At this point, we're done with the scale, so we'll get it out of the way and move on to our wet ingredients. And since this cake has no egg in it, an egg does usually help a cake to kind of rise and keep that rise. You'll notice one possibly unusual ingredient among the wet ingredients: water. We've got 1/2 cup of water, that's normal. Oil, because we're not using butter, so we have 1/3 of a cup of oil. Again, nothing unusual yet. And then we have 2 tablespoons of vinegar. And if you've ever made a baking soda and vinegar volcano in a high school or middle school science class, you know that those 2 ingredients react to form a bunch of bubbles, and that is going to help our cake rise and stay leavened. So we'll give this a stir to make sure things are evenly incorporated. We have no patches of dry flour or cocoa powder lurking at the bottom. Let's give that a check. Whoop, a little bit more mixing needed. And there we go. And now you'll notice that this is still looking pretty thick. That's because we have one more ingredient. We have 1/2 cup of hot coffee, and that does 2 things for us, both of which, or in fact it does one thing, but in 2 ways. It's going to bring out our cocoa flavor, or our chocolate flavor, and that's because coffee naturally pairs with chocolate, and it will bring out any chocolate flavors that are already in a recipe without actually making the final product taste like coffee or even like mocha. The other reason, since that was hot coffee, it will bloom the cocoa, right? That will help to bring out the chemical compounds in chocolate or in cocoa powder that make it taste chocolatey. If you don't want to use coffee, you can use hot water. You could go all hot water instead of that half a cup of regular room temperature water. I just didn't want the vinegar to kind of start to evaporate by adding boiling water to the whole thing right away. So I'll make a note of that down below. As far as your options, you could also go with a full cup of coffee if you prefer things to have that little extra kick. And ta-da, all done. Now what we need to do is pour this into our prepared pan. For this, I will switch to a spatula and bake it in a 350-degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes until a toothpick tester comes out just clean of batter. You'll also notice that the sides of the cake will be starting to pull away a little bit from the pan. All right, we will see this when it's out of the oven. After 30 minutes of baking, our cake is out of the oven. I'm gonna set it on a cooling rack, and while it cools, we're going to make a simple glaze. You could definitely serve it just as is or with a sprinkle of powdered sugar, but the glaze is so quick and easy, we may as well go for it. So in this cup, I have 1 cup or 115 grams by weight of powdered sugar, plus another tablespoon, about 5 grams of cocoa powder. And I did sift that. I didn't bother for the cake itself, but in the glaze, definitely you'd notice the little lumps of unsifted cocoa powder in particular, so it was worth taking a few minutes to sift it. And now all I do is add a little bit of water, anywhere between 1 and 3 tablespoons of water. That's 15 to 45 milliliters. So I'm going to go with the low end of that and stir. And the idea here is to get a glaze that is pourable but not too thin. So definitely more water for me. Keep stirring. And it does go pretty quickly from crumbly to too thin, so go easy with that water. You can always add more, but if it gets too thin, you're going to have to add more powdered sugar and cocoa powder and wind up with more glaze than you need, or maybe not, I don't know. All right, so this is pretty thick. I'll go with just a tiny bit more water, like so, and that's about what I need. So I have options here. I can pour this on the hot cake, and that's a good idea if I wanted to soak in and I'm planning to serve it in the pan. Or if you're planning to put this on a cake platter or something, you'll lose a lot of glaze to the edges of the pan if you pour it on now. So wait for your cake to cool, which is my plan, and then pour your glaze on as soon as you get it onto the cake platter. So we'll give this a few more minutes of cooling time, well, at least a few more, and then we'll glaze the cake and plate it up. Our cake is cooled and I've transferred it to a simple serving plate. All that's left to do is to pour on my chocolate glaze. I'll start from the center and just work my way out to the edges. And the glaze itself will do the rest in terms of getting to all the corners and such. And this is a pretty simple rustic thing, so don't worry about it looking perfect. because it doesn't have to look perfect. It's going to taste perfect. Perfectly chocolate, quick, easy, and easy on the budget while we're at it. So with that, ta-da, we'll leave you one depression cake, perfectly chocolate, perfectly tasty, and ready for you to try yourself. We sure hope you do. And while you're at it, like, subscribe, and check out our next video every Friday at 4 o'clock.